Okay, hello everyone. Good morning. It's morning for me. No, it's noon. Never mind. Okay. Yeah, welcome to this is the Query Letters That Work presentation. I'm going to run through some slides here, and then hopefully there will be time for there will be time for some questions at the end, and then I'll drop in a Discord. If people want to chat more for a little bit. I'm Curtis C. Chen. You know what? I should just start my slideshow because that's where everything is, and so I don't forget anything. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. So there should be captions in there. So yeah, okay. Yeah, so thanks to everyone at Flights of Foundry for putting on this con. I've had a great time so far. Hopefully you have too. And now we're going to talk about query letters. First, who am I? I'm Curtis C. Chen. As I said, I've written a couple of novels. I've written worked on some series for Realm, which used to be Serial Box. The newest one, Echo Park 2060s, coming out later this year. Hopefully, we'll see. Still working on it. Yeah, and in particular, I'm qualified to give you this talk because my first novel, I got an agent by just writing query letters cold. Didn't, meet anyone at a convention or anything like that. I just sent a bunch of emails and eventually had to learn a lot along the way, but eventually sort of figured out um, some of this stuff. And hopefully I'm going to be able to help some of you who are trying to sell a novel or get an agent for your novel. And what am I going to say? Okay, so let's start with why query letters are a thing. And part of this is, publishing is very small. The publishing industry is relatively small compared to the number of people who write stuff and want to get it published. So there needs to be some way for people to figure out, agents in particular, literary agents, to figure out who and what they want to represent without having to read all of everything that's out there. And query letters are a way for you to tell someone about your work, do your best to get them interested, but also to demonstrate that you are going to be a professional who is going to be a person they want to work with. And by the way, there is a panel tomorrow. Sunday, I'm moderating a panel on professional querying practices, and that's going to have some great people on it, including my agent, Sam Morgan. So that's going to be fun. Yeah, so we can talk about like our actual like history and working relationship and all that kind of stuff. If you want to come check that out tomorrow, that's again here at Flights of Foundry. Okay, but query letters are a thing, and the big important point I want to make here is that you respecting an agent's sort of published guidelines on what they want to see in a query is the first step in you demonstrating that you are going to be a good person to work with. You're going to respect the other person's time, and you're going to be open to that collaborative process. And it's going to be slightly different depending on who you are and who they are and what their project is. Okay, so it's not going to be the case that you're going to get an agent and they're going to do everything you tell them to do. It is good to have them, push back a little and ask you questions about, are you sure this is how you want to do it? Have you thought about doing it this other way? All this kind of stuff. And we can talk more about that later. I'm rambling a little. I apologize. I just drank some coffee. Okay, so query letters. So this is a book. A lot of people talk about how to do query letters. I really like Ali Carter's book. She's a YA author. The reason I like it is she talks about how do you write a book and all the different aspects of it. And her language is very plain spoken because she's targeting her book. This is a nonfiction book, just to be clear, on writing. She's targeting it toward teens and young adults. But for that reason, it's very plain spoken. It's very straight ahead. And she also interviewed a bunch of other authors. You can see here some of the names on the cover, Marie Lu, Holly Black, Maggie Stiefvater, and gotten them to share their experiences. So you not only get the advice, but you also see, oh, this is what actually happened. And this is a range of things that people, did with their own work. Okay, but she has a couple chapters about the query process, and these are probably questions you've asked yourself as you go through this agonizing thing. And I certainly went through this myself. So, you know, some of the objections people have to having to write query letters, like, why do I need to tell them about my book? Why can't they just read it? If I could tell my story in a paragraph, I wouldn't have written a whole book. And I can't wait to get an agent so that I never have to summarize my book in 3 sentences ever again. I have bad news for that third person, because you're always going to have to do this. I have to do it with my agent even. It's fine. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But here's the thing. So query letters, as Ali says here, are very important. And they're tricky because they're very different from writing your whole novel. And the query letter needs to be professional, but not pretentious, clear, but not boring, and clever, but not cute. And that may sound like a very, very difficult thing, because you also have to tailor it to what your story, your project is, whatever genre that is, whatever the voice is. But you can do it. And I know, because, you know, I've done it, a lot of other people have done it, and we've all come from nothing, right? We started out knowing nothing about writing. We've learned all this stuff along the way. So, you know, what one person can do, another person can do, and we can help each other. All right, so in very general terms, this is what you're trying to do with a query letter, right? You're going to take your novel, which is, this is not to scale, obviously, but your novel, which is like a huge thing that you've, you know, put together over, you know, a lot of time, and you want to distill it down into the query, which is not going to have everything in it that the novel does. This is an imperfect analogy, by the way, so please do not at me with your science knowledge. I know, it's fine. I'm using a metaphor. But your query, it has to be very short, obviously. It's 200 to 300 words. And it's not going to tell everything that's in your novel. It is just, you can think of it as the pitch, sort of. That word has different meanings in different contexts. But it's what you're going to use to get someone interested in your novel. And in this specific case of a query letter to a literary agent, you want to get them interested so that they want to read more of it, ideally to request the full manuscript, and then after they read that, want to offer you representation, then, you know, help you sell that to a publisher and all that. Okay, so that's the general idea here. And I'm going to talk about ways you can do this badly. And this is sort of an extreme example. You may have seen this on Twitter a few years ago. There's a hashtag, explain a film plot badly. This is for The Wizard of Oz. I'm just going to read it out loud. And the description of The Wizard of Oz is, transported to a surreal landscape, a young girl kills the first person she meets and then teams up with 3 strangers to kill again. So if you've seen this before, you may have thought about why this is bad in a very particular way. Because it does describe things that actually do happen in the story, but the way it describes them is not telling you what The Wizard of Oz actually is going to feel like when you read that book or when you watch that movie. It's like, this is not the movie that I was, you know, advertised here. Okay, and so I'm going to try to break this down somewhat scientifically, and using this diagram. So this diagram is from a website about Antarctic glaciers, which is very interesting. If you want to go check that out, I'm going to give a link to a PDF that's got all these slides in it and all the links, so you can like click away and do tons of homework later. You're welcome. Okay, but this slide, so this is talking about accuracy versus precision and trying to tease out the difference, because in science, those two terms have very different meanings. You know, lay people often use them interchangeably, but so one example you can think of is relevant to Flights of Foundry is time. Okay, so you can talk about, you know, you have a watch, which I don't now, but I used to when I left the house wear a watch. You can think about your watch, right? Your watch may be very precise in that it can, you know, it shows you down to the second, maybe to the millisecond, like what time it is exactly. But if you've set it for the wrong time zone, it's not going to be accurate, because even though it's very precise, it's like it's exactly this time, and you're like, but it's the wrong time zone. So it is not accurate in that it is not showing you correct information. Okay, it's one way to think about it. So to use this bullseye analogy, which sort of helps illustrate the difference between the two, right? So we can talk about whether you have low or high accuracy and then low or high precision, which is how we get these 4 quadrants. And so that example of the bad Wizard of Oz exploration, I'm going to argue, is low accuracy but high precision. And again, I'm sort of mapping the science terms onto storytelling here. So it's not going to be perfect, but bear with me. I think this makes sense, and hopefully this will help you think about, what you're doing when you're trying to boil down, to distill your novel into this little query. Okay, so I'm arguing that this is high precision because, as I said, it does describe things that do happen in the story, but it is low accuracy because you're describing the wrong things. Okay, and on the bullseye, it's represented by, you're precise in that you've got that very tight cluster of dots, but it's not accurate because you're in the wrong place. You're not aiming bullseye. Okay. And if you flip the two and talk about high accuracy, low precision, you could say, have a description that talks about, oh, like she goes to Oz and there's this witch and there's flying monkeys and magic and poppies and all this wacky stuff, and you're like, and that, I would argue, it is more accurate because it is giving you more of a feel for what the story is and what makes this particular story special, right? Because it wouldn't be the Wizard of Oz if she just stayed in Kansas the whole time and there were no witches or munchkins or any of that stuff, right? No Yellow Brick Road, all that. Like, that's sort of essential to the story of the Wizard of Oz. But I would say it's low precision because even though that is important to the setting and the world building, it's not really the heart of the story. Like, it's not why people care about the Wizard of Oz still after, I don't know, 90, 80, however long it's been, even longer since a novel. And so I'm going to argue that ideally what you want for high accuracy, high precision, and sorry, just a step back. So the high accuracy, low precision with the witch there, you're kind of hitting the bullseye area, but you're not very tightly clustered. So you're not very precise in that. You're not really getting to the heart, like the emotional core of the story. And I'm going to argue that the emotional core is Dorothy's relationship with the people she meets along the way. The Tin Woodsman, the Scarecrow, and the Lion shown here. What she learns about them, and then eventually what she learns about herself at the very end. Spoilers. Okay, I'm not going to do the spoiler. You know what happens in The Wizard of Oz. You can look it up. It's on Wikipedia. It's fine. Yeah. So I think this is important to thinking about your query and thinking about, what is it that is, one, unique to the story, but also what is the heart of the story. And it's going to be sort of an intersectional thing, if I can borrow that term from another field. Yeah, and then there's Judy. Okay, so so in general terms, so the important thing, another important thing to remember about your query letter is that you're going to be telling someone who has never heard of your story before what the story is about. So you're going to have to introduce some concepts, maybe, and it's going to be important to pick out, how much you need to tell this person about your whole fantasy world that you've made up, and how much can you leave out right now, right? You just want to hook them initially. You just want to get their interest, and you want to get them to read the full manuscript so that they can then like really dive in and get everything out of the story. And so I find this pyramid a useful tool sometimes. May or may not work for you, depending on the project, but I feel like you can always break a story down, no matter how big it is. There are going to be 3 basic things you can talk about. What is a conflict? What is a character? And what's a context? Okay, and for speculative fiction, context, what I mean is basic world building, right? Is it a fantasy setting? Is it a future science fiction setting? Is it an alternate history? Whatever it is, but it could also be if you're writing, a historical romance or a straight historical or even if you're writing literary, what is the setting of that? Is it, a suburb in Connecticut? Is it, out in the desert in Nevada, and you're whatever it is, right? There's going to be some specific context, and there's a reason that your story happens there instead of somewhere else. Okay, character is obvious. That's who is it happening to, and then the conflict is what the problem is. And I feel like the pyramid sort of illustrates a good way also for just writing the story or creating the story initially, right? Because you've got to have the context first. Characters exist inside that context. The character has a conflict within that context, and that's what makes up the whole story. Okay. But if you're going to only focus on one thing in your query, which is going to be very short, again, 200 to 300 words, I would say you can never go wrong with character, because we are people. It's going to be another person reading your query, reading your novel, and at the root of it, like, story is about learning about other people and connecting with other people, whether or not they're real people, or whether they're only real because we've been told a story about them in such a way that we can really, imagine and grasp what their life is like, even though it's different from ours. Okay, so you can never go wrong by leading with character and really telling the reader, the potential reader, why they're going to care what's happening to this person. Okay, so here's another slightly different way to think about it. Again, it's always three things. It's rule of three. But this is John Rogers. He's a screenwriter. He's done some stuff. Look him up. It's fine. But so he says, you can write a story any way you want, but every story has to answer these three questions. Number one, who wants what? Number two, why can't they have it? And number three, why do I give a shit? Okay. And this is sort of similar to the pyramid, which I just showed, in that, who wants what is sort of, who's the character? Why can't they have it? You can imagine it's the conflict. And why do I give a shit is, in some sense, the context, right? It is more sort of a meta thing, as not just the setting or the world building, but why is the reader going to pick up this book instead of this other book? And again, and so I think this is a slightly different way to come at it, because you can answer these three questions in any number of different ways, but the answers can still engage a reader. Okay. All right. So again, these links will all be in the PDF, and you can peruse them at your leisure. Okay, so let's talk about the actual query letter. And these days, it's going to be an email, not just because of the pandemic, but because your publishing is in New York. You're probably not in New York. Literary agents are all over the place these days. And also, this is something I didn't mention originally, but I think Allie Carter touches on it in her book, is that the skills that you're going to use to write a query letter, to distill your whole big novel down into this little tiny pitch, those are going to be skills that will serve you even if you're not going for a traditional publishing deal. Even if you are going to be an indie author, you still need to come up with that back cover copy that goes on Amazon, that goes on the back cover of the book. You need to come up with like an even shorter one, like maybe 1 or 2 sentences, that you can tell people when they ask you, at an event, at a convention, at the bar, whatever it is. Someone's going, "Oh, what are you working on?" They don't have 15 minutes to listen to you like describe the whole thing, right? They're just being friendly. But if you can hook them with like one sentence or like just a few words, like, "Well, my project is a gender-bent Alexander the Great in space." If you can hook them like that quickly, like, "Oh, tell me more. Like, I might be interested. I might be an editor who wants to buy that." By the way, that is Kate Elliott's latest book. Check it out. And here's another important thing. I'm going to get to the query letter in just a second. But here's an important thing. Ideally, if you can come up with a pitch or a hook that immediately tells people whether this is the book for them, okay? And your book is not going to be for everyone, and that's fine. You want to identify the correct audience, the appropriate audience for your book, right? You, you don't want to be like, I don't have any bad examples. Sorry. Okay, but this is the thing, right? Like, so the whole query letter process, you're trying to get an agent to represent you to sell your book, and it is not about finding the quote unquote best agent, because every agent specializes in something a little different. Every agent has slightly different tastes. Every agent is going to have a different personality. So it's really about you finding the right person for you to work with for this project, right? Um, so the best agent for you may not be the best agent for another writer or even for another project. You know, people change agents throughout their career, and it's a totally normal thing. Okay, but let's talk about the query letter or the query email. And again, I'm going to direct you to another person who's done this much better than I can, Carissa Taylor, who is a YA author, I believe, in Australia. She has a whole series of blogs on query anatomy, and one of them, she lays out this very easy to follow template for the email. And I'm not going to go through all this because it's pretty. I feel like it's pretty straightforward. If you go to the blog, you can read her sort of explanation of all this. But the most important thing in here is going to be the pitch, right? Which is just turned red here. It's going to be the meat of the query, and the important thing to know about it is, one, it's short, 200 to 300 words, as I've been saying, and it is written in third person present tense. And again, this is what agents are expecting to see, and if you give them what they expect and what they ask for, it's going to be easy for them to make a decision, and it's not going to waste anybody's time, because they're going to be able to tell you like, oh, this isn't the right project for me. Or if it is the right project for them, you are making it easy for them to see that. Okay. And so this is a thing that you're probably going to spend the most time on. I certainly did. Like, how do I describe my story? What's the best hook for the story? All this kind of stuff. And we're not going to talk about that too much. Yeah. Okay, but the email in particular, and all this is, it's all pretty standard. You don't have to think about it too hard. And even if you forget everything else, the three most important things here are: this is the information that the agent wants to make the decision about, whether to request a partial or full manuscript from you, and to move forward with this process of seeing whether they want to offer you representation. Okay, and it's the hook, the book, and the cook, which I love because it rhymes. I think that's from Laurie McLean, who was a literary agent. I got it from Kat Rushdahl. Not important. Yeah. So it rhymes, is easy to remember. So the hook is that pitch, the 200 to 300 words written in third person present tense. The book is just details about the book, factual details. So what's the title? What's the genre? What's the word count? That's it. That's all you need. And the cook is the bio about you personally. And this actually, I will say, is optional, because if you don't have personal details that are relevant to the project that you are querying, if you're not Arkady Martin querying memory called Empire, and you are not an archaeologist by trade, you don't have to put that in your bio. It's not relevant. If you're writing a book about I don't know, talking horses that colonize another planet, and you are a horse breeder, that may be relevant. Kind of up to you, but I will say totally optional. Don't worry about it if you don't feel like you have relevant expertise or like big publishing credits or anything like that. The important thing is the hook and the book. And the book is just, they want to know, is this a genre they represent? Does the title give them any more information about the story? And is the word count reasonable? Okay. So I'm going to share. So this was my first novel, and this is the final flap copy that actually is on the book itself, on the back cover, on Amazon, whatever. And you can read this later again. It'll be in the PDF. You can also look this up online. Probably at your library. Check it out. But that went through a bunch of different versions that are all slightly different. But if you get the PDF, you can look at this. And so I'll say, I wrote the first version in 2013 and asked other people to look at it, other writers, and they gave me great feedback. So I refined that and then sent it out to Query Shark, which I'll talk about later. And in 2014, I actually created to a literary agency. And then later in 2014, my agent pitched it to editors, and he sort of rewrote some stuff. And you can see those differences if you look at this later. But I'm not going to read all this because it's kind of a lot. Okay. And then the second book, again, this is the flap copy. And this is the thing I really want to talk about with the second book is that I'd written all of the first book, right? It took me 10 years, average, whatever. And the second book I hadn't written at all. And it was only when we took the first book out on submission, my agent's like, hey, we've been talking about this as a series, so how about you give me like a paragraph on like 2 more books that would be in the series. And I'm like, okay, here you go. And kind of just made up a couple things on the spot. This was a pitch that the editor liked, so he bought both of them. And you can look at this final pitch, and then this is the stuff I was talking about with Sam before that. And the important thing here that I want to point out is, the first one is very vague, if you look at it. The second one gets much more specific, and in particular, it talks about a couple of things that seem like major plot points, right? Like someone's arrested for murder, and then someone finds like a secret base on the dark side of the moon, and you're like, whoa, those all seem like big spoilers. And actually they're not, because again, going back to the sort of bullseye, it's like, yeah, those are things that happen in the story, but you don't know how they happen. You don't know exactly what's going on like around it, and you don't know how the characters are dealing with it. And that's where all the interesting stuff in the story actually is. And so I just want to share, not just a humble brag, but the second book, while I was writing it, I shared it an early actually, apparently this was copy edited manuscript, so it was like pretty much all done. Sent to another writer who wanted to read it before it was published, and I had already talked to him about what the plot was and sort of overall story, so he knew all the spoilers already. And even so, he wrote back and said, even knowing some of the twists going in, he was blown away by how cleverly they unfolded, and that was a nice thing for me to hear. But in general, I think the lesson here is that it's not just about hiding the big surprises, right? Because certainly there can be some of that, and in particular in a query, you probably don't want to tell them how the book ends, right? Because they're going to read about that, or they'll ask for that in the synopsis, whatever. But you just want to hook them, and you can hook them with something that seems big, but if you're doing it right, again, I'm going to argue that you're going to have a really good hook, but there's going to be even more behind that in terms of exactly how the story happens and how the characters are dealing with that big thing that you've already told them about. Like there's going to be a hijacking, there's going to be a murder, whatever, right? Like think about mysteries, right? Everyone knows going into a mystery novel, somebody's going to die. Right? That's not a surprise. That's not a spoiler. The reason they read it is to find out, exactly how did they die? How did the crime happen? How are they going to solve it? Blah blah blah. What else happens along the way? Okay. So I would like everyone to be able to get past the sort of no spoilers mindset in writing your query letter, because the important thing is, you have to understand what is and what is actually not a spoiler. And you have to trust that your book, the experience of reading your book, is going to be so great that you can give out a little more of it right up front and say like, yeah, come on in. You're going to get more of this, and it's going to be great. You do have to deliver on that, but that's a separate issue. Okay, and I think this is almost the end, so I'm gonna close out with a few more resources. Again, I don't have all the answers. No one does. But hopefully, and I'll say this, like people on the internet are really, really willing to help. People in the writing community are very generous with their time, and it's great. And part of it is that I can speak for myself personally. Like, I want people to get better at this. And my very selfish reason is that when I go to a con and I'm talking to someone at the bar, I don't want to sit there for 15 minutes and listen to you pitch your story. I want like one sentence, two sentences, and I can decide, okay, am I going to sit here and have another drink, or am I suddenly going to have an appointment somewhere else that I have to get to right now? No, I wouldn't do that. I don't know, maybe I would. I'm not going to predict the future. Okay, but other resources. Okay, Locust Magazine, if you don't know about it, is a great resource for many reasons, but every month they also list book deals that have happened. And this is interesting because one, it tells you which writers are selling stuff, who their agents are, and which publishers they sold to. And so you can look for things that are maybe similar to your genre and look for whether those agents are open to queries at the moment. Another good thing is look for books that you own, or go to the library bookstore when it's safe, wear a mask, and look at the acknowledgments in the novel and see, did the writer thank their agent? If they did, that means they're a good agent, and you can look them up. Okay, and the other thing I want to highlight here in the Locust book deal announcements is these are even shorter than your query letter, right? So Meg Elison, #1 fan, Misery for Millennials. And that is enough to tell you if you're interested in that book, right? Nan Fisher, some of it was real about a reluctant psychic. And here I've also highlighted the title because, again, the title, I think, gives you some more information about what the tone of the book is going to be. And Andrea Tang's Kingdom of Without, a cyberpunk Six of Crows. And yeah, fuck yeah, sold right there. 5 words, sold. Okay, that's what you want. Okay, there's a successful queries database. This is open to anyone to look at. There's the Google link. It's a spreadsheet, and the cool thing is it covers all kinds of different genres. So you can do a search. You can search for authors like Valerie Valdez right at the top there. Total coincidence. You can see who their agent was, the details about the book, and all of these have a link to the actual query, so you can go and look at how they wrote theirs, and if you know the book, then you can compare. Okay, I know the whole story is this, and then this is the part they chose to highlight in the query. Very educational, fun way to spend your time. You're not busy. And for actually like finding agents to query. So when you're done writing your manuscript, your novel's finished, you feel like you're ready to go out there and to start this the next part of the process. There are a few websites. Agentquery.com, I believe, is free to use. Querytracker.net, I think, has a free and a premium level you can pay for. I'm not sure exactly what the features are, but you can find out. Publishersmarketplace.com, you have to pay for it, definitely, but you can do like 1 month at a time. And I would argue that's pretty handy because they have a lot of information and a lot of detail in their database. So when you're ready, you can just pay for a month and spend that month like really digging in. You can do your research, and then you can spend longer querying, but you've already got the information. I mean, I'm not saying stiff Publishers Weekly, but it is an expense, but a tax deductible business expense. So that's good. Okay, so QueryShark. So the successful queries database is good, but it only shows you the finished product for the queries. QueryShark, this actually helped me a lot for various reasons that I'll get into. But this is run by Janet Reed. She is a literary agent, and she started this a while ago. It's still running, although it's kind of been paused since last summer for obvious reasons. So what she does, she invites authors to send her their actual queries for like real novels they've written, and give her permission to post them on her blog, so it's all public, and she will critique them publicly. So it can be pretty brutal sometimes because people will send her stuff that she doesn't like, and she will tell you exactly what she doesn't like about it. But she will also often recommend ways to fix it, and often ask people to send her the revision. So you can, in some of these, you can see the evolution over time of someone either listening to advice or not. Anyway, so I read through a lot of these, and you can search through them by genre, so you can look for specific things um, that are related to what you're working on. And I decided to send her my query, and she liked it, which was great, very encouraging, but no feedback. But the good news about that is that I emailed her and thanked her, and she replied. This is a very long story. The short version is we had a conversation, and she read my manuscript. She gave me notes, which she did not have to do, and I'm very grateful for that. And that sort of has led to me trying to pay this forward ever since then. And when the book came out, she actually mailed me like a paper copy of the page from Kirkus where they had a positive review, which is, again, it's rare for Kirkus. So very happy for many reasons, but it's great. And I think it's another example of people in the writing community and in publishing wanting to help each other and wanting to help people that they want to see succeed, right? And I knew Janet wasn't going to be my agent because she doesn't represent a lot of spec fic. She does mostly like crime and thrillers and stuff like that. But when I was querying other agents, and I told her when I got an offer, she wrote back with a very positive email, and so that was very nice, and it's kind of informed sort of my attitude toward other publishing people ever since then. Okay. And speaking of agents, all of them are on Twitter. This guy down the corner, that's my agent. If you have Skinsby.Potter, please send it to him so he'll shut up about this. Ann Tibbetts is down in LA. She's also an author, so she knows a lot. Her book, Screams from the Void, is out this year, I believe. The book she wrote, not just go look her up. And then Kate McKean, she's a VP at Howard Moorheim, and this is from last year. I, again, argue this is still good advice. No corona queries unless you're Dr. Fauci, and you're not. But she has she had a Substack newsletter. She probably doesn't anymore, but the archive is still up. And she has a lot of great stuff in the archives, including this whole 3-part series on how to write query letters, which she goes into a lot more detail on all the stuff that I just talked about. So check her out. And again, she's on Twitter. She'll tweet out interesting stuff all the time. And this is me. That's my website again. And that is the PDF. Pretty sure I uploaded that. There are 3 C's in the domain name. I use my middle initial when publishing. And that's a capital Q just to make things difficult. But yeah, if you download that, it'll have all this information. All the links should be clickable. And you can do all your own research, homework. I shouldn't call it homework, but it's funny, so I do. Yeah, and hopefully this will help you to refine your own query. I was very happy to see on Twitter this morning, Stephanie Charette tweeted about this session, and so that I helped her with her query, which I'm very happy about. So she has an agent now. And also, the last thing, I didn't get to put it in the slides, but if you like podcasts, I know some of you do, you could check out the Print Run podcast or Print Run podcast, whatever it is. With I believe it's Eric Hain and Laura Zatz. They're both literary agents, and they just talk to each other about publishing industry stuff. And their latest one, I believe, was about genre, in particular speculative fiction, and how that term might mean different things to publishing professionals versus reader versus writers. Okay, so that's all I have to say, and I'm going to go check for questions now, if I can figure out what all these buttons do. Okay, stop this. Yes, okay, that stopped. And now, let's see, what do I do here? Let's see if this worked. Okay, Twitter. Okay, yes, okay, so thank you, Sarah. She put the actual link into the Discord to the PDF, and the link works. Great. Good on me for doing it right. Okay, I'm going to scroll up and see if there are questions earlier. Let's start at 12, 35, 36. Okay, Um, someone recognizes the book. Okay, great, thank you. I love Discord. Discord's great. Okay, Jennifer has a question. I am seeing conflicting advice on the order of a query letter. Your example from Carissa Taylor showed personalization, hook, book, cook, but I've also seen some people say it should be personalization slash book, then hook, then cook. Is this really something to worry about? Short answer, no. As long as you've got all the right information in there. And I will say, pretty much everything else is optional aside from that hook section, right? Um, really, all you need a good, pitch, and you need contact information. That is honestly the bare minimum, right? It is nice if you have other things to say to sort of introduce yourself. So one, if you've actually met the agent before at and we've got the Print Run podcast link there. Thank you very much. Um, you can mention that. And sometimes if you do meet an agent at the conference and they're like, oh yeah, email me later and put this in the subject so I know it's not spam or so get past the filters or whatever. But yeah, I think you can never go wrong if you have a really good hook and you can just start with that. And that is what I did with my query because I was creating agents cold. Like I hadn't met them in person. I just done my internet research on them. And so I knew they were open to queries. They represented my genre. They were looking for this kind of book, something in the ballpark anyway. And so a lot of my query letters were just, dear, person name, and just launch into the hook. Kangaroo is a spy, blah, 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 blah. And then, Waypoint Kangaroo is a science fiction spy thriller. And it's 90,000 words, 88, 100,000, whatever word count was at that point. And thank you for your time and consideration. That's it. And that is honestly that's all the information that is strictly necessary for an agent to make the decision. They read the pitch, decide if they like it, if it's for them. Um, and I'll also say in my case, so a related question that people often ask is, if I've queried one agent at this agency and they reject it, and then later I see, I'm still working on a novel, another agent at that agency is now open, can I query that other person? And the answer is maybe. I think if they seem like a really good fit at that point, there's no harm in it. But I will say generally, agents in the same agency talk to each other about what they're reading and who's querying them and all that. They'll even talk to each other like outside the agency, right? Like I said, publishing is small relative to the number of writers out there. So the best thing you can do is not to get a reputation as that person that does that weird thing. Um, and funny story about my own experience is that when I queried Jabberwocky, there was only one agent open at the time, which was Eddie Schneider. So I emailed him, and then I got an email back from this Sam Morgan character who I'd never heard of before. So this seems suspicious. But then I looked him up, and he actually did work at Jabberwocky, and he was sort of he was an assistant to Joshua, the head of the agency at the time. He was just starting to get his own clients as an agent himself, which is why he wasn't listed on the main page or anything like that. But I looked him up and did my research, and he was legit. And it turned out, Eddie had gotten the query. I thought, oh, there's a good query, but it's not right for me. Like it's not the kind of stuff that I really connect with. But maybe Sam likes it. So he gave it to Sam, and Sam did like it, and so he emailed me, and then we started the conversation at that point. Yeah. So yeah, I hope that answered the question. Yeah, honestly, the best thing you can do in a query email is to not say too much about stuff that's not relevant, and basically don't be the character in the movie that like goes on and on because they're nervous and they don't know what to say, but they want to keep talking because they've got the person's attention. Like, keep the email short, keep it to the point, and don't worry if you don't have. Again, don't worry if you don't have a lot of credits, if you don't have a lot of experience you can talk about. you don't have to, hype yourself up, because the most important thing is, what is your story? And I think the other thing that, this is sort of a philosophical point. Um, I feel like, if you can write a good query, 200 to 300 words, that gives someone a sense, like a really good sense of what the book is going to be like, and gives them a sense for the tone and the voice of the book. Um, I think it is a skill, and it does, it's totally different from writing a novel. So it does take, some time to develop, and it is work. But if you can do that well, I think to the agent, it demonstrates that you know what the story is that you are trying to tell, right? And then they can go read your manuscript. It's like, okay, like, um, I see, what this person wants to do, and I see, places in the manuscript where it's being done well, and then I can see places where I can help them improve it, because we both already agree, based on the query, like, this is what the story should be, and so we can both now collaborate on working on the actual novel to get it, as close to that platonic ideal as we can. That's sort of my personal philosophical thing. Okay, another question. Oh, hi, Luke. Should you mention if you're previously agented? How much detail? Why do you ask, Luke? I have no idea. Sorry, I know Luke. He's a friend. Um, I don't think so. Again, I think there's probably a right time to mention if you're previously agented, and it may not be in the query letter, because again, is it relevant to the project that you are pitching to the agent, that you want them to represent? I mean, you're querying them so they know you are not currently agented. So that's sort of a given. Um, if you are currently in some weird circumstance in terms of rights, or contracts or anything like that, I think that would be important to mention. But if you just don't have an agent, um, I think it's kind of a given, because you're querying. Like, why else would you be querying? Um, and I think, at some later point in the conversation, it's probably the right time for you, Luke, to bring up your special situation, because it's a funny story. I know hopefully it's funny to you now. Enough time has passed. But yeah, I feel like, the most important thing about the query letter is, what is the current project you're working on, um, and then that is just a conversation starter, right? And then you can take things from there, and once you've started emailing back and forth, and I can say this was kind of my experience, you kind of have to, feel out, okay, so what do they want to talk about next? Is this the right time to bring up this? And the agent knows that, you're going to have questions, so don't feel bad about, like, oh, I shouldn't ask this question. No, you should ask questions. And even once you have representation, like, it is the agent's job to answer your questions about publishing, right? It is their job to know how publishing works and to help you sort of navigate all that. Okay, hopefully it helps. We can always talk later, obviously. Okay, another question from Janai. If the agent doesn't say whether or not to include a sample, what's the standard for that? Should we include 10 pages anyway? Short answer, no, please don't do that. Look for the agent's submission guidelines. Most of them will publish them, on their literary agency website. So they will say, I'm open to queries, I'm looking for these genres, or I'm looking for, whatever. And I would love to. Sometimes they'll have like a manuscript wish list thing. That's also a website you can go to. Like, oh, I'd love to see a story that's, specifically this. And they will often include guidelines, like, and they can vary very widely, right? It is a very personal preference. Some people will say, like, just send me your query in an email. Some people will say, send me your query and your first 5 pages as an attachment. Some people say, first 5 pages, plain text only, no attachments. I hate attachments. Some people say, send me the query, the first chapter, and a 5-page synopsis. Some people say a 2-page synopsis. Some people don't care about synopses at this point. So whatever the guidelines are, and if they don't have guidelines, again, I think safest to assume that you only need to show them the minimum information, right? Email, dear person name, page in the book, word count, genre, title. Thank you for your time and consideration. That's it. You're out. Move on with your life. Okay. Hopefully that helps. Okay, another question here. Is it okay to include multiple POVs in the query for a multiple POV novel? Okay, and I apologize if I'm missing some questions here. I'm going to figure out how the Discord works and hang out a little longer after this session is over, which I think may be right now, but I'm going to answer this real quick. This is kind of difficult because I think this is one of those things that depends on your specific project. Okay, and I'm going to say it's tricky to put too much information into something that's only 200 to 300 words long. Okay, um, and and I understand that people may be working on like really, long, interesting, like epics that have, multiple POVs for very good reasons. You have a lot of characters, so you have a lot of different stuff, and maybe they start out in different places, they come together at the end. I think for the query, ideally pick one, maybe two people to focus on. And ideally the people who are sort of featured toward the beginning of the story, because this is linear storytelling, so you're going to start in one place and end in another place. So so understanding that if the agent likes a query, they're going to request probably the first part of the book, a partial, and so what they see in the query, they're going to see more of. They're going to expect to see more of in that partial. So that is something to consider. And again, not knowing the specifics of anyone's project, I'm going to say the important thing in a query is, like Ali Carter was saying, you have to be very clear, but not boring. So be very clear. If you are talking about different characters, be very clear when you're talking about one versus the other, and when you're switching contexts. And ideally you're doing it in like a couple different paragraphs, maybe 3 paragraphs. And I think the most important thing and the hardest thing in a lot of cases to do with your query is to convey the voice, your voice as a writer, and the particular tone of the story. And I'll say this is one thing I spent a lot of work on with mine, because I was pitching it as a science fiction spy thriller, but it's also funny because the main character is very snarky and sarcastic, and so I worked really hard on getting that tone into the query without saying like, this is funny, because people are not going to believe that. Right? Like, this is funny. It's like, no, you just got to show them that you're funny, or you got to tell the joke and they can decide if they think it's funny or not. Right? This is sort of the back and forth you have to go through. Okay. Is there, okay, let me do one last question here that I see at the bottom. I know it's considered good etiquette to follow up with agents to inform them if another agent requests a partial or full. Are there other circumstances where it's okay to reach out, or should you just interpret no response as a no? Okay. Again, this is a situation where the submission guidelines should help you out. And when I was querying, I definitely queried a bunch of agents where they literally said, like on the agency website in their guidance, they're like, send me this thing, and if you have not heard from me in whatever it was 6 weeks, assume it's a no. And I was like, that makes me feel terrible. It's like, but that's that is their working style. So and those probably weren't the right agents for me anyway. For that, among other reasons. But yeah, I just made my own spreadsheet to track things, and so sometimes I do say, if you haven't heard from me for after 2 months, 3 months, send me an email just to check in, because maybe I get busy and then I'll pull it out on the pile. But some people do say, yeah, if you don't hear from me, it's a no, and you just have to live with that. And yeah, again, it comes down to you have to respect the other person's time and their working style, and you are looking for the person that you are going to work well with, and that's not going to be the same for everyone. Okay, so I'm gonna stop here so we don't go over time, and I thank you all for coming. Hopefully this has helped. you a little in your own querying journey. The PDF was linked there, so you can check it out. Check out all the links. A lot of information online, but yeah, and yeah, I am going to figure out Discord here. Thank you. I think I've moderating a panel tomorrow on professional querying practices. I have a reading later today at some time. Uh, and what else am I doing? I'm on another panel tomorrow about puzzles and games. So yeah, thank you all. Hope you have a great rest of your Saturday here at Flights of Foundry.